Okay, so we are almost ready. We still have like 5 minutes, but maybe catch me up. What have you all been working on? We've got our panel of writers.
I don't know if I rented a screen.
Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, last minute bathroom breaks.
In one of those days.
Cody, are you going to be working on switching people out for the screens here? Because I don't seem to have that ability.
Let me put you as co-host. I made Gaby co-host too. So that between the two of you, you should be able to do that.
So now it's just that. How do
I think it's just Spotlight, right?
Yeah. I'm just trying to figure out where it shows up.
I think it's just on the 3 dots above the persons.
I was
Oh,
on
I see.
here. She got it right. Yeah, the dot.
Spotlight. There you go.
Yeah.
Cool beans.
I wish I did not know so much about Zoom. But middle schoolers will force you to know every little trick.
Oh yeah, wow. I can't imagine just corralling all of the like that.
It's a whole new world now.
Going to be so nice to get to run around and do stuff again, especially for the kids, but it's actually for us too.
Not anytime soon.
I know.
My school just announced, this is Antioch, right, the university, that they're not even considering going back to live until at least July of 21.
Oh.
Good to know. It's, to be able to mentally prepare for that.
Yeah.
I wish I would hear a decision from our district just so I would know.
LA, they were going to do a hybrid program, so you had to fill out a a survey. I was like, not going back. Like, why am I going to send my kids back to school for a couple of days? So that, yeah, no. It's not socialization when you're 6 feet apart behind a screen with masks on.
Yeah. No. Right. Okay, I'm going to start letting people in. Maybe we have like some informal chat during that is, low key. So we should now be getting people coming in, and I think we should also be now on YouTube.
Hi, YouTube.
Yes. Hello to the universe and everyone connected in this. Yeah.
I feel like I've forgotten people exist outside of a square on my computer screen. So welcome, everybody.
Welcome. We're going to get started in just a minute, and I'll do a little welcome then.
Thank you for staying safer at home and joining us online. The benefits of wearing sweatpants cannot be understated.
I saw someone had a question, which was like, so how far into 2021 do we have to like start wearing hard pants again? Which I think is a really important question. I've gotten very, very used to sweatpants. I don't actually want to give them up. So welcome everyone. This is Made in LA Celebrate Small World Books. And I'm Cody Cisco. I'm going to introduce some of the editors and contributors to Volume 3 of Made in LA Art of Transformation, which is our annual fiction anthology series. So I don't know where the boxes are showing up on your screen, but we have Gaby Lorino, Sarah Chisholm, Allison Rose as the editors. And important to note also that Allison has designed all of the book covers, which are fabulous and beautiful. And you can kind of see them over Narika's shoulder. Oh, there you go. That's Volume 3. And you'll hear in a second from Sarah about Small World Books, who we're partnering with for today's event to support them. So she's got a little speech ready to go for you. But I also want to introduce Andrea Otten and Noriko Nakata. They are contributors to Made in LA Volume 3, and you can read their fabulous stories in the book. And we'll be talking today about nostalgia, the beach, and stories, and how we get inspired by LA. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sarah, who's going to give us a little background on Small World Books in Venice.
Okay. Small World Books has been a staple of the Venice Beach community since 1976. It has received tremendous support from the local eclectic community and yearly visitors from around the world. The bookstore has also passed the management hands of 3 generations of one family during the 50th. And during the 50th anniversary of the bookstore, Mary Goodfader received an accommodation from the city of Los Angeles. Sandcastles don't weather storms, but Small World Books does. This bookstore has been a part of the Venice Beach community for 50 years. Let's show our love and support by buying local, please. Okay. And you can also support them through the internet. Please go check them out on Small World Books, and I'll go ahead and post the link in the chat. And they have also Small World Books Bookshop, and I'll post that link as well. But you can also click directly onto it from their page, Small World Books homepage, and you can also it will redirect you to that as well. But I'll go ahead and put that in the chat for you. Please go ahead and check them out and support them. It's a great bookstore in a great community for over 50 years. So please go ahead and check them out. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. All right, am I up? Let's do it. I'm Allison Rose. Hi, everybody. We are very excited to do this virtual book tour. This is now I think our third or fourth that we've done. Part of the exciting thing about, let's see here. Part of the exciting thing about doing this book tour is that we're engaging with all of our local bookstores, which is really exciting, especially in this time now. It's very difficult for any small business, most especially bookstores. So we very much encourage you guys to visit them online if you can, and hopefully when they reopen, we can go back to bookstores and back to reading. So what we'd like to discuss today with our contributors is how bookstores have affected us in the past, and obviously are affecting us now. So we're going to throw it back here. So the first question that we're going to throw out to our panelists is about what is your earliest memory of bookstores, and how is it meaningful to you as a child or as a young author and or reader? So we're going to kick it off with Noriko Nakata. She has the first story in our Made in LA anthology called Infamy. So we're going to put it up to her. If I can spotlight you. There you are, Noriko, welcome.
Thank you so much. I want to take just a minute to thank the whole Made in LA team. The year of 2020 is going to be memorable for many things, but also it has been such a privilege to be a part of the Made in LA community. The year started with an acceptance for Infamy to the anthology. And then, you know, those early weeks of COVID, we had a couple of Zooms. And so it's been a rough year, but it has been really highlighted by getting to know these LA writers and to talk LA and literature with all of y'all. So thank you so much for creating this space for us. And to kind of end 2020 the way it started, with a little bit of writing about Los Angeles. So I love bookstores. I think most writers do, but my earliest memory of bookstores was actually in Oregon, where I grew up. My parents decided to open a bookstore in our small town, a very specific Catholic bookstore that they named the Shalom Shop. Happy Hanukkah to anyone who's celebrating this evening. But it was a little bit of a confusing bookshop name, the Shalom Shop, but my earliest book memories are of walking between the shelves of that store with my mom, puttering around, doing whatever it was she was doing. And I think I was kind of an early, not really quite reading yet. And so I would just kind of run my fingers along the spines of these books and crinkle the plastic on the little First Communion veils. My mother would never, never let me get. And then my second early memory was piling into the family station wagon to drive for a day trip to visit Powell's Books in Portland. And coming from a small town, Powell's was just like the whole world of books being up right in front of me. And I don't know what my parents were doing. I feel like I just have this memory of wandering aimlessly through the stacks at Powell's, which I still love to do, and have done at Small World Books. So those bookstore memories are super profound, and I'm missing those faces right now. So those are my early bookstore memories.
Nice. Thank you so much, Noriko. That is hilarious. I didn't know you actually have serious connections to a bookstore. I love it. Andrea Outen is going to be our next panelist to talk about her love of bookstores and her early memories. She has a story in our anthology called Empty Glass. So Andrea, I'm going to toss it on over to you.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much to Small Books and everything that everyone is doing to keep our anthology in the eyes and the minds and hopefully the hands of readers. And I love bookstores, and I really want people to be able to keep in business as this hard time continues. So we're here for you. Bookstores are exotic in some way to me because they really weren't a part of my childhood. I'm from Dayton, Ohio, and my parents were from a really nice part of Cincinnati. And so to go to a bookstore as a child was so much different from going to the library. My mom was a research librarian, and she'd work like 2 nights a week. And so the library was more of how I, viewed access to books. But there was a little shop in Hyde Park, and I don't know the name, and I tried to find it. And going inside there was really sort of like coming into a fairyland, or a fairy tale. And the way the books were displayed, and I don't know if it was specifically a child's store, a bookstore for children, or I was really drawn to the area for the children. No memory there. But then a little later, like I say, I'm from Dayton, but we would go out to Yellow Springs, which is east of the city. And that's where the original Antioch College is. And it was a little artisans town. And so to go there was a little bit of like a vacation. And they have Dark Star, it's like comic book too, but it's Dark Star's books. And I started going there young, and then as a teenager, and then we ended up living there, and former students, because I'm a teacher, would be there and working there. And they had 2 black cats, it seems like all the time. And coming in there was just transformative. And I've always said that people who work in bookstores remind me of people who work on theater crews, backstage crews and on film sets. And I really dig those people. Like, they all seem to be the same in a way that's the best way. So I really like going in and talking and relating. And so going into Dark Star in downtown's a block long of all these great little shops and head shops and stuff. And going in there was just like, what was the latest? What was the newest? And to be in that smaller town, to be in the flyover state, was not to really have access to the greatest, newest things, or that was my interpretation of it. So then to come out here into the bookstores out here has been so exciting, and still, like I say, sort of exotic for me. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that right now.
Oh, there we go. Thank you so much, Andrea. I love the whole small town to big bookstores in LA. I'd love to know more about what you think about big bookstores here, but maybe we'll get back to that. All right, so now I'm going to pass it back on to Sarah Chisholm. She has 2 stories in this anthology, Fortune of the Three and the Kabuki Mask, and We Found Love as the Undead. And actually, we grew up in the same town, Sarah and I did, so I'm kind of curious to know what her interpretation of bookstores is in good old Monrovia. So I'm going to pass it on to you there.
That was a great shout out, Allison. It's a very small town with one bookstore on the main street that also sells witchcraft things. Cody would know a lot about that, but we're not going to go into that. You have to read his story. But basically, I feel like bookstores are more like, because like Allison said, it's more like we grew up in the same very sheltered area, right? The suburbs, not much to do there, but that bookstore was like, I love that bookstore on the Myrtle. You know which one I'm talking about, Allison. So I would go in there, and that's it's not my first time in a bookstore, but I found, the perfect book in there, a Harry Potter book. And everybody was talking about it and, oh, Harry Potter this, Harry Potter that. I'm like, I have all these other things I have to do. I'm not going to read this book. And I go in there with all the witchcraft things, of course, all the Wiccan things, everything they have in there. They have feathers, they have crystals, they have anything you could want. That would be the place my mom would be like, never go there. She's like, oh no. So of course I went in there, right, to check out some books. And I think that was my first time where I just felt a freedom, because it was the first time I went into a bookstore without one of my parents. And I felt like head over heels for this book. I mean, I fall head over heels for every book. If I touch it, I'm going to love it. It's my one weakness is books. So it's like walking into a candy store for me. So the smells, the everything, I have to touch them. It's just, I don't know, I go ballistic when I go in there. And I actually have a withdrawal, I don't know, from being, and even if just being in a room full of books, the way they smell, the way they look, that comfort that they give me. So I'm missing a part of that comfort from being in a bookstore or a place with a lot of books, like a library or anything like that. But going to that particular bookstore and finding Harry Potter on the shelf was really my first time where I made a book decision and my parents weren't looking over my shoulder like, what are you gonna get? Let me see. It was my choice. And then I went to the opposite direction and I chose Black Boy. I don't know what I was thinking choosing that at such an early age. I was like, I'm gonna read this story and I'm gonna feel like I relate to my grandparents. I read that story and I was scared out of my mind. I lost some of my innocence that day when I read that and Native Son. But just, I love books, and just being around them, being in areas where, that other people have put down, books are forever, basically. You can never take back the words in books. And that's something that that idea has always been very profound to me. It's like, it's there, it's permanent, right? There's a saying, Maya Angelou, I think she said this, like, people can't say what you did to them, but they can always tell you how you made them feel. Well, with books, you can read what they said about you. The words are eternal, and so there's always that feeling there and that sensation or that mood or that thought that they provoked from you. So that's always relevant. It's always there and it's eternal. It's there to stay, right? So that's something that I always think about when I think about books and bookstores. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. I love that. I love how the text in books has this sort of eternal residence in our lives. And that's probably something that we as writers are hoping to capture for somebody else in a positive way. It's a hard thing to do, as we've noticed. All right, I'm going to toss it off now to Gaby Lorino, who was one of our contributing editors. She has a story in Made in LA Volume 3 called Star-Crossed. And I'm going to pass it on to Gaby. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. I don't remember a lot about bookstores as a young person. I mostly went to the library, and we went to a very small school for most of my education. So it was just this tiny library, didn't get replenished much. But when I went away to college, I got to do two really amazing things, according to Andrea. And one of them was work backstage on the plays in the theater department. And the second thing was I walked into a bookstore that was just off campus, and the guy at the front was super friendly, chats everybody up. And so I asked him, I'm like, do you ever hire people? And he was like, let me get your number. And I got to be the girl who worked at the local like used bookstore where people would come and get their literature that they were studying in school. It was so awesome. And we used to do charity events. I made a quilt out of all my old t-shirts. And this is from that store. It does not exist anymore. They, like many people from the recession, the rent went up and they decided they were too old to sign a 3-year lease. But it had a huge science fiction section. Someone literally came in and bought all of their science fiction books and set up a new bookstore. And they are still friends of mine, kind of like extra parents, sweetest couple you'll ever meet. So anyway, this is my Gen X quilt. It's from Alaska and Paris and all the places I went, but mostly it's from Tampa, Florida, where I mostly lived most of those years. And my best memories are hanging out in that bookstore, listening to the guy in the front chat people up as they walk in, and helping them, running around all day, having a cup of yogurt in the back, and then going back out there and taking care of customers. And it's wonderful. I still visit it in my mind. I miss it so much.
Thank you, Gaby. I think for you love to touch on the nostalgic parts. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So next up is our other founder of Made in LA, Cody Cisco, who wrote the story Call Us Home in the third Made in LA anthology series. And I'm very interested to know what his early stories of bookstores are, because Cody always has amazing good stories. So take it away, Cody Cisco.
Pressure's
on?
on. Pressure's on, yes. And I want to say I love seeing all of the stories that people are putting in the chat about their bookstore experiences. It's really cool to see. Kind of similar to Allison and Sarah, I grew up in the suburbs, which were pretty boring. So when I would go to bookstores, I would go to Walden Books in the mall in Northern California. And it was my favorite place within that mall, you know, or a Barnes and Noble that was nearby. Those aren't very inspiring, but one thing that I started to do, I think around when I was like 15, I would take the BART into the city and then Muni and go into the Castro, where like I couldn't do anything. Like I couldn't go to any bars. Even the coffee shops were kind of weird because like a 15-year-old gay kid amongst like older men was like, you know, I would write in my journal in the cafe and be like, oh my God, like this is so weird. But one of my favorite places to go was A Different Light, which I think there was one down here in WeHo too, but there was one in the Castro. And that was just the idea that there was a place where you could go and get books that spoke to who I was, that I couldn't find anywhere else. Just it's when you're that age and you're kind of, you know, dealing with your sexuality, it's so important to feel like there's a place for you, and that people are telling stories that resonate with you. So, you know, I had long trips back and forth from the East Bay to San Francisco, trying to get a little taste of adult gay life. And that bookstore, A Different Light, was definitely the destination when I would go.
Nice. Thank you, Cody. I think I'm last up for this question. I'm actually going to channel quite a few of you. That for me growing up, we didn't really spend a whole lot of time going to libraries or to bookstores because it was so much cheaper to go to a library. So why would you go to a bookstore? But I loved being around books, and we had growing up in Monrovia this one tiny library that I was pretty much secluded to the children's section until it was high school time that I was doing inspiring stuff happening in that library. But like Gaby said, it wasn't until I was out on my own and was in college that I discovered what bookstores really could be. Because, you know, there's the mall, there's the Barnes and Noble, and what was the other big one? I can't remember. They're all gone now. But just these huge box warehouse type bookstores that share all the same sorts of books. And then I was hanging out in LA. I was hanging out in Hollywood. I was hanging out in Franklin Village. I've actually made a mention in my story, Night of Fires, about the Bourgeois Pig. And there's a bookstore right next to it, Daily Planet, that I remember going to this really strange, eclectic coffee shop. And then there's this extraordinary bookstore next to it. It wasn't just a bookstore. It had all sorts of trinkets and art stuff. And it had books about topics that you wouldn't see at the Monrovia Public Library. Now it's about politics, and it's about sex, and it's about, you know, culture. And I really loved being immersed in those really randomly eclectic bookstores that were inspiring. And I love, like everybody else was saying, how exciting it is to walk into a bookstore and see all these physical, these random physical items that hold stories that will blow your imagination open. And it's really exciting. And it really was growing up, seeing those books and wondering, could I do that? Could I be the kind of person that could create that sort of physical manifestation of stories that are rattling around in my head? And I love all of those kinds of bookstores. And it's really sad to see that so many of them have been falling by the wayside. You know, it's just kind of the nature of things. And I really hope that we can keep these inspiring bookstores alive, and the libraries as well. Libraries are very, you know, important, but the bookstores that are there to serve the community and reflect the surrounding community and the people, those are the places that I really hope stay. We can get rid of Barnes and Noble. I mean, I hope I'm not going to get like chastised for saying that, but you know, keep the small guys alive. So thank you so much for all the bookstores, and especially Small Books to helping us promote our own stories. You know, it's a relationship, right? So because Small World Books is out in Venice Beach, we're gonna kind of divert our topics a little bit here. We're gonna talk about the beach. So more nostalgia. We love talking about nostalgia in this group. So we're now gonna go through the list again. We're gonna start with Noriko, and I'd love to know what your earliest memories are of the beach. If you didn't even grow up in Southern California or on the coast, you may not have even met the beach until much later, right?
Yeah,
So I'd love to know.
Yeah, Central Oregon is pretty landlocked, but my parents were both born and raised here in Southern California. So whenever, every summer we would come down and visit family, and trips to the beach were with my mom's side. Dad's side did not do beach. So it was my mom's side of the family that took us to Zuma. My earliest memories of Southern California, of the beach. There's an Oregon coast, but it's always cold, and the water is freezing. And my sister and I, hi Yuhiko, I think she's here as one of our guests. She and I think got hypothermia just from swimming at the Oregon coast. Quite a few times. And so one of my earliest memories of the beaches here in Southern California was going to Zuma and getting lost. I must have walked like 3 miles on my little kid legs. and was crying and was looking for a green umbrella. And I couldn't find the green umbrella in the sea of beach goers on a hot summer day. And so the lifeguard had to do an all call to all of the other lifeguard towers. I had walked so far, my parents had to get in the car and drive to come rescue me from the crowded Southern California beach. I figured I could just keep walking and I'd eventually end up back in Oregon. But I'm really glad that they found another solution than this poor child walking all the way up the coast. So that was my first. But I also, when I moved to LA, I did try to learn how to surf, and got beat up pretty. I've stood up a few times, but surfing is rough, and El Porto will turn you upside down. And I have huge respect for all of the folks who make their way to the beaches to surf even now, or those early morning swimmers, especially with pools closed right now. A lot of folks are swimming in the ocean, doing these open water swims in wetsuits. And I'm just like, wow, that's a lot. But the beach is so huge for me now that I live in LA. I used to play beach volleyball pre-kids, like every weekend. And LA used to have a triathlon where you start at the beach and then you bike into downtown and you run around downtown. It was a very challenging triathlon, but it was a lot of fun. And the LA Marathon now finishes at the beach, which is a really cool way to see our city, to run from Dodger Stadium to the beach. And my kids are growing up at Tower 26 over at Ocean Park in Santa Monica, not very far from Small World Books. And yeah, so not too much nostalgia about LA beaches other than kind of recent years of living on the beaches and certainly missing those spaces right now.
Love that. I think maybe once we get out of COVID times, I have yet to run the LA Marathon, but it's on my bucket list.
It's a good one. Find a Students Run LA team and run with a bunch of kids, and then you'll just be like, I'm just doing it for the kids.
It's good motivation. I like that. All right. So now we're going to pass it back up to Andrea Outen, who is another landlocked, born and raised. So I'd love to know your stories about what it's like for beach nostalgia for you.
The beach is my favorite. I would consider it maybe sacred. And so the first time I saw the beach wasn't until I was in the 5th grade, and love water so much. Like, even it's in almost maybe possibly every story that I've written, and whether it's a river, a lake, or the ocean. And even in Empty Glass in our anthology, there's a moment that's really reverent and in the moment of nostalgia, right, of recalling the ocean and what could happen to the characters. So as a 5th grader, we drove fighting the whole way in the one station wagon, all 6 of us. And when we got to the Outer Banks of North Carolina, some like 14 hours later, I remember us bounding down to that beach. I mean, hot under our feet, running. And we went right into the water, and my dad flipped out and he screamed at us to come back, and he lectured us and said, "You've never been to the ocean before. You don't even know what it's going to be like for your bodies. You can't just run out there. You have to learn. You have to." We were like, "Oh, okay." So times on the East Coast like that were the most fun, and the water is quite warm, right? But it's really far away. So it keeps it sort of as again, the word keeps coming up, exotic, but the experience was just a top of the line for us. So part of what was the draw to moving to LA is just how much I love the ocean. And so I love Zuma Beach, like you were talking about, and have a lot of really good memories. But the first time I saw the West Coast, I just have to slow down and tell you that we came out to Coronado Island. And that was the first time I'd ever seen the West Coast beach beyond what you see in movies. And we were coming to my brother's graduation. He was a SEAL in the Navy. And we were walking up and down that beautiful beach, and my brother said, "Oh, wait, you have to see this." And the sun was setting, and it was perfectly straight on, this incredible, sumptuous orange ball. And everyone on the beach stopped, and we all watched it go down. And when that last sliver disappeared, everyone clapped. I've never forgotten it. So it was this one moment of this natural performance that just has stayed with me ever since. So yeah, I we still try to get there even through this COVID time. That's been a moment of sanctuary. So we'll just drive down to Panga Canyon and turn right and just head up the coast and stop somewhere. And it's a place I love to write. Also, I'll just take my computer or my notebook and sit in the car, roll down the window and listen, and let it wash over me, if I can be frank. Yeah, so to me, it's one of the greatest things. So I'm trying to remember the first time I went to a small world. When did I first go there? But I love going there, because now it's everything that you were saying, especially Allison, some of the things you were saying about what a bookstore is. And Sarah, you were talking about how we commune with books in this way that, again, is sacred. And then there was one on the beach that blew my mind. It was almost too much. It was great.
I love that. I love all your stories about being at the beach. All right, so Sarah Chisholm, you're up next. I want to know what your fondest memories of the beach. Take it away.
One of my first memories of the beach. I always went, but the most defining moment where I had like this lasting memory or impact was my mother's birthday. She wanted to go to the beach for her birthday. She had a birthday cake, and she has 2 children under the age of 10. So we all know what happened, right? There was sand on her birthday cake. She was so upset, and she just wouldn't, like, she's like, "There's sand on this birthday cake. I can't eat this birthday cake." It kind of unfortunately kind of ruined her day. And my mom's like a huge celebration person, just in general. So everything kind of has to be very nice. I mean, she's the kind of person, it's Valentine's Day. We're very young children, and she's giving us Valentine's gifts from her, like, "I love you." So every moment she loves to celebrate. So just that fact that sand had got on her birthday cake. But my mother's also a very thoughtful person and a very empathetic person. So after she had her moment, she kind of calmed down and said, "You know what? It's not as important as I think it is. The most important thing is that I have my kids and that I have my family." So she apologized. My mother actually was an apologizer to her children, which that's the most impacting moment I had at the beach, just because it's centered around my mom and just how compassionate and empathetic she is. So that's my favorite thought or memory of the beach. But just in general, I love the beach. I love the sound of the waves. Won't really go in the water, but I love the way it smells. I love sitting there and, reading a book, or, I'll put my feet in the water, or just if you go to San Pedro and they have like the rockiness of it, you go down there because they don't have it where it's sandy, and you can see like the little animals. I love marine creatures as well, but just having that moment where you can kind of commune with nature and feel at peace. And that's what the beach symbolizes for me. It's a moment of peace and reflection. And it's the perfect place to read a book. If you think about it, it's nothing but gentle waves rolling in, and you're just there with your book and your thoughts, maybe a pen or paper if you write, and it's just you being at one with nature. And I mean, nobody really talks when they're at the beach. Nobody's sitting there, and you don't turn to somebody and say, "Hey," that usually doesn't happen, which is nice because I'm a recluse. No, it's nice because it gives you that moment where you can actually, channel your energy to your book or your writing or your thoughts. So it's the most public alone place, one of the most public and alone places that you can be. So it's my memories of the beach and my thoughts of it.
Love that. Sand, the ultimate enemy of any beach visitor. All right, now our other East Coast beach dweller, Gaby Lorino. I'd love to know what your fondest memories of Tampa.
I think probably the best recent memory was when I woke up and I was in West Palm Beach and I got to see the sunrise. And then my friend and I jumped in the car and we drove across the state and we went to visit some friends and then we got to see the sun go down. That is something you can really only do in Florida because it's not that. It only takes a couple hours to get across the state. If you ever have the chance to go to the Gulf of Mexico, which is where I usually used to go based on where I lived, it was the closest ocean type place. It's like warm as bath water. It's not very rough. The surfing isn't very good, but it's super soothing and very laid back. And we've had a great deal of luck not getting hit by hurricanes around the Tampa Bay area. There's a legend that the natives placed a protection around Tampa Bay. And people will say this every time there's a hurricane, and literally it will go up or it will go down, but it will not hit in Tampa Bay. I've never seen it. I've been around for 47 years. It's never happened. So anyway, I hope that will hold. I'd hate to see Tampa underwater. And really, my memories of California's beaches are very positive. I've mostly come to the beach on my honeymoon, when I was meeting my husband's friends, when we were dating or engaged. It's been, I think, across the board, just wonderful California beach memories here, because I haven't really been there enough to be living a normal life. It's a special occasion when we go, and it's usually to see people or to spend time together with my husband. So anyway, there are way, way better waves out here than there are in the Gulf of Mexico, but you all probably knew that.
Awesome. I love that story about Tampa Bay.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully it's true. Hopefully they should have done a spell on the entire East Coast down there.
That would have been, yeah.
Better for everybody. All right, Cody Cisco, my Bay Area friends.
Yeah.
Talk about some cold beaches up there in the Bay Area.
Oh, so cold. But back then, like when I was a teenager, I would go to Stinson Beach and get in the water and be in there for like an hour and somehow be okay. Like, and I can't do it now. Like, you went up there, you're in there for like 2 seconds and your feet are already ice cubes. And it's like, the pain is like severe. It's not just like, oh, my feet are cold. It's like, oh shit, these might fall off. Like, so that was, yeah. So those were my kind of earliest moments. And the cool thing about Stinson, at least from where I was coming from, was that we had to drive like up into the mountains and through the redwoods, and kind of, it could be very sort of, overgrown and like a cute little journey. And then you emerge into this like glorious white sand, huge expanse of beach. And it's just kind of like Andrea was saying, it's kind of like reverent and sacred. More recent memories of the beach, when my husband and I moved to LA, we got boogie boards because we're like, we're going to do this, like, which is funny because we didn't use them that much, but we went to Santa Monica and tried to boogie board there. And like the beach is not shaped correctly for that type of activity. It basically lifts you up and then just slams you, at least the day we went, when the waves were there was a lot, just slams you into the ground. So like we did that for a while, and then we're like, oh, we're just going to break in half. Like, we can't keep doing this. And then I think it was like a month later, we're like, all right, well, let's, we don't know the beaches around here. We're kind of new to the area. Let's try some new places. And somehow we wound up in Manhattan Beach, which is a whole thing. It's a strange place. But what I noticed was like the waves were perfect for the boogie board. You could just get on and then ride for like minutes before you got to the shore because it was just so flat and perfect. And that was kind of the level of intensity that we needed to not break ourselves. But yeah, I mean, I think what we like to do also is go down to Black's Beach in San Diego, which is near Torrey Pines, which is this huge expanse. And it's kind of like what Sarah was saying, you know, you can be there among people, but also totally alone because it's so vast. Yeah. And well, I could go on and on, but yeah, basically it's one of my favorite places to go. And I think there is something kind of reverent about the size of it and everything about it. That's it.
So many different beaches, so many different experiences too, right? That's one of the exciting things about the California coast is you can go from the warm beaches of San Diego all the way up to Northern California where you were freezing your butt off. But like some of you coastal dwellers, you know, I grew up in Southern California here, and I spent a lot of time going to the beach. And I'm probably one of the few people who don't like the beach. I really didn't like it. We would do the boogie boarding thing like Cody and his husband tried to do. I was very good at that actually when I was younger. But we would go every year with this huge group of neighbors to Huntington Beach every Labor Day, right before school started, right? It's Labor Day, that's right before school starts. I always get the two confused. It was like 50 people, you know, tons of people, and they have the little fire pits that you would go, you know, so everybody's in the water, the sun would go down, and then we'd be cooking around the fireplace. And then as I got older, then it was the high school kids, and everybody's just sneaking drinks and, you know, partying as hard as we can until the late hours till we get kicked out of the beach. But yeah, I've never been fond of the water or the sand. The sand gets everywhere. But what I think is very interesting about the beach is how finite it feels sometimes, because that's as far as you can go unless you change transportation modes. So if you're on your feet, yeah, you can swim into it, but you only can go a few hundred yards, right? Until you get swept out, like I almost did. It's probably why I don't like the beach. But it does, there's something finite about it. And it's very interesting being in California in that way, because we have the mountains one direction, we have the desert in another direction, and then we've got this huge ocean that it just goes on and on. It feels like it goes on and on forever. And you cannot beat the sunsets. As all of you have been mentioning, you know, how beautiful the sunsets are. I did actually learn that there's something about this time of year, how the earth is shaped, or where the sun is, excuse me, as opposed to this time of year, and how the sun bounces off the ocean. That's actually what helps create those beautiful sunsets. So it is unique to Southern California and to LA, which I think is really fun. Fun little fun facts. I'd love to open up now the discussion about our stories in the Made in LA anthology and how nostalgia plays a role in those, in your stories, in your life, in your creativity. So we're gonna knock it back up to Noriko about what her story, Infamy, is all about nostalgia, and it's actually a very beautiful, poignant story. So if you want to talk about that or read something, it's all on you, girl.
Oh, okay. I didn't prepare to read, so I'll just talk, I guess, a little bit. So it's actually a good time to talk about my aunt. My aunt is the same age that Natasha from Infamy would have been during World War II. And she just passed this a couple months ago. And so I've been thinking a lot about her and what it must have been like to be a young girl during World War II, and the friendships that she probably had that she then, walked away from. And she was the one of 2 daughters in a family of 9 other boys, my dad being her younger brother. And so infamy is kind of, so I work in the neighborhood. I work at Emerson Middle School, which is in Westwood, which opened just a couple of years before World War II and had a pretty sizable Japanese American community there on Sawtell. And so I would drive, to work every day and pass through Sawtell with all of its nurseries and giant robot store and great food, and wondered, what it looked like when some of those streets weren't even paved and there was farmland, and imagined Natasha riding her bike to the beach. And then having World War II hit, and being taken away into the desert. I think she probably missed the ocean quite a bit. So infamy was, the setting of just trying to imagine what the world was like for all of those families along Sawtell, for the Japanese American community that was so, they had huge boarding houses there. And so a lot of the more recent immigrants would live in those boarding houses and then work in the farms that were in what is now Mar Vista and the South Bay. And so this community, was then just uprooted. So imagining really on a personal level, thinking of my aunt, thinking of my students, what it would have been like to show up to school and suddenly you had enemies that you didn't know you had before, because Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor. So trying to imagine the really personal level, what it was like to wake up the day after Pearl Harbor and make that walk to school, on a beautiful winter morning, much like the ones we're having here in LA, and have the whole world transform overnight. So that, nostalgia and transformation, I think, are why this story really works in this particular collection, because it's all about how the world can change in an instant.
Yeah, Noriko, what I really loved about your story is how you challenge us to see LA as we know it so well, in a perspective from a different time and a different cultural viewpoint. It was very beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. All right, Andrea, you are up next again. I'd love to know how nostalgia and or transformation affected your story, Empty Glass, and how you put that into your story.
Right. I do want to say that I love Noriko's story. I was so moved by it, and just climbing into a different culture and imagining the lives. So it was so well done. So I just wanted to say that. Yeah, so I have a freakishly vivid memory from way back. Like, I have strong memories at the age of 2, and they've been corroborated. And I remember sensory details and can tell you the outfits that people were wearing and the music that was playing. And I've never really understood what that is, but obviously it's something that I can rely on when I'm writing. So nostalgia is something I love so much that I have to be careful, because it can find its way all over my work, So I have to sort of hold back and just give us little bits of it. But in the story, I think that the nostalgic part especially hits this character when she is thinking in comparison of her back home life, which is very different from what mine was, and her current situation of trying to make it in the boom town, from being from the small town. And I think that nostalgia about one's sensory surroundings is a great sort of vast world of how we get through what we're going through. And for her, and the story that inspired me to write it, I was just really interested in climbing into the mind of an imagined character and what it would be like to get through the day in with so much that is almost like assaulting the senses, right? And I love LA. I say that every time we have a meeting, and I love the sound and the bustle and the something going on every night, and miss it right now. Like I realize even so much of what I miss about all that stimuli, right? And so transformation also in this story is somebody finally figuring out how to handle the what she cannot handle, and whatever she ends up doing is sort of up to the reader to decide. But yeah, I love a story that's transformative for sure. That's kind of what drives. So I don't know if there's really more to say than that, but I love my memories and I rely on them, and they become a part of my art probably most of the time. Yeah, and people will say to me, "How do you remember that?" And come to me and ask me questions, because it seems to be, I don't know why, but it seems to be like I can tell you so much about it, and I visualize it. So it's a very visual kind of a thing. And I'm a vivid dreamer, so when I have overnight, I can recall such detail. It's almost like scripting a movie. And yeah, just I've always been like that.
Andrea, do you ever find that you're trying to make sense of those memories or dreams in your stories?
Yeah. Yeah. I really feel like a dream is either an idea finding a way to find a voice, or it's somewhere I'm working something out, or I've been so struck by something because like I say, I have strong senses, that it stays with me and comes into the night. But I try to write them down. When I wake up, I try to capture some of them. But most of the time, I admit to you that I don't. I'll try to get better at that. There could be a lot that I could grab for stories.
I'm sure we all wish we could immediately put all of our dreams to paper as soon as we wake up, because I've come up with some just perfect movies in my dreams, and then it's gone in a flash.
Doesn't that say something about our brains? I mean, they
I
are
know.
really high powered when they're just let loose and free to do what they do. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the conscious mind. It messes us all up. All right, Sarah Chisholm. I'd love to hear about your story and how it relates to nostalgia and or transformation.
Well, I think my stories are a lot about transformation. I mean, when you're going to be a mask and it transforms into a little brother, then yeah, that's a big transformation. But I also think that for We Found Love as the Undead, that's very much a story about nostalgia or longing, because the main character Satoshi, he longs for these women, this set of three sisters. He longs for them to be in his life, and he'll do just almost about anything to have them in his life. And that's always going to end up in turmoil when it's a love triangle sort of situation. So, but it's him basically just not being able to come to grips with the fact that he has to choose one. And not only does he have to choose one, but that longing, that lingering that he has to hold on to the past that he had with the other ones, that has to be gone as well. So it's all about transforming from having this kind of just almost responsibility for all three women, to the responsibility that he has to himself to man up and choose one lady just one, you know. So it's accepting his failure of his life of holding on to these three individuals who he doesn't really accept as individuals, and wanting them to be what he wants them to be and to love them the way he wants to love them, you know. So it's, yeah, I feel that that's definitely nostalgia. He thinks about them and he thinks about his past with them and basically what he wants, you know, but it's not a reality. It's not what's really going to happen. I mean, just this longing and this lingering and this beckoning, you know, in his heart, just to have all three of these women. And it finally comes down to just one who rips him apart, literally. So that's definitely a big part of it, as well as transformation, because they transform into zombies.
It is true. Nostalgia really speaks in your story too about, you know, longing for a love, of a version of love that doesn't quite exist any longer. We are all can do that. Gaby, actually, that's a really good toss-up to your story about longing for love in a version, in a nostalgic past. I'd love to know about how your story, Star-Crossed, speaks to that.
Oh, thanks. Basically, it was inspired by a dream, probably not unlike what Andrea talks about with her insights that she's able to have. I had a recurrent dream about someone for a long time, and then inspired by this quote, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." I wasn't able to understand what the dream meant until there was a transformative experience and things were not the same as they were before. And so when I was able to turn it into a story, I used a lot of water imagery to symbolize the unconscious, to symbolize love and emotions. And I did my best to bring it, give it that Southern California flavor. I wrote and I wrote and I wrote, and then what ended up being presented is the absolute leanest version of it. But I had a lot of ideas, and they were all mostly at the beach. But anyway, I would definitely invite anyone who has a romantic streak to check out Star-Crossed. You probably can guess from the title that it's about people who love.
Thank you, Gaby.
Thanks.
All right, Cody. I don't know how much your story has to do with nostalgia, so I would love to know your take on that. Your story, Call Us Home.
Yeah. I don't think it was on my mind as I was writing it. What I did try to capture was kind of the gathering force of things going to shit really quickly. And I was writing this in like the end of 2019. So, you know, pat me on the back for having a little bit of foresight. But yeah, it's about these 5 loosely connected characters who each of them experiences kind of a break in their lives, and what they had expected about the direction of their lives changes pretty drastically. So I think those dislocations are what characters and people eventually look back on, and that causes them nostalgia. So they're like pre-nostalgia phase, where the change is happening to their lives. Later on, they'll look back and be like, oh, you know, like the before times, they were so great. But you don't know that the before times until things change. So I think that's kind of the connection for me.
I mean, we can speak to 2020 on that, right? What was it? We were thinking 2016 was the worst year ever. Welcome to 2020. So I guess it's my turn then to talk about Night of Fires and how it relates to nostalgia. It actually does quite a lot speak up to nostalgia, considering the fact that it's surrounding 2 sisters that are reliving a night that happened 17 years ago. And the narrator of the story takes us back to what it was like for her those 17 years ago, including some of the locales around LA and around Hollywood, which are places that I used to visit. Maybe it wasn't 17 years ago, but it would have been about 15 years ago, as a young bright-eyed 20-something, 20 years old, visiting, being so, I grew up just outside of LA, but I hadn't really immersed myself in what I actually didn't know what Hollywood really was. Even for a suburban girl, Hollywood still was more an emblem of the industry and not so much this place with underground bars and comedy shows at midnight and just the weirdest people making up from everywhere, because there's transplants and all different kinds of people that make up Los Angeles. So being immersed as a young 20-something in that world, it does still hold a very special place in my heart, even though it's now been 15 years, and some of those places have changed. The bars have closed down. The shops are no longer the thrift stores. There's some trendy coffee shop. And I appreciate the nostalgia of what I used to know, but then I also have to remember that even 15 years ago was 15 years ago, or, was the present for somebody else, wishing it was 15 years ago for them too. I'm going, oh, I remember when it was that place, and so it just depends on what your first initial immersion in this landscape is. That's the interesting thing about Los Angeles, especially, is because it is constantly changing, and there's constantly neighborhoods are being brought up with a new culture. There's a new group of people that are making this neighborhood their own, and it just evolves, and there are no boundaries to Los Angeles, which I think is kind of cool. So yeah, but there's also this interesting part of nostalgia. I feel that is true for us as writers, especially when we're trying to capture an environment, is how we perceive that and how it's different from, like, for example, I'm going to kick back to what I was saying earlier about growing up in the same town as Sarah, and how, we a year apart, and our trajectories were completely different, and we probably experienced Los Angeles in completely different ways. And there's something really special to that. So my nostalgia isn't the same as her nostalgia. And I think that that's unique and special to us as writers. Anyways, so I'd love to now open this up to anybody on the panel who has any questions for each other, or anybody who is watching right now. You can unmute yourselves and chatter away as much as you want. Anybody have any questions to ask your fellow panelists or side comments?
Allison, what you said about kind of how LA shifts around us, and how both neighborhoods change, but it seems like in a place that is constantly reinventing itself, and that sort of almost celebrates that, it means that, like, if you're going to be nostalgic, you're talking about something that's not there anymore. Like,
right.
Like we live with things that are going away constantly. And like one reaction to that would be to like hold tighter to them and say like, oh, but I really, I love this thing. And the other would be like, whatever, like things change and just let it go. But I think that what's interesting is people hold on to it here, like, because it's fleeting, because it's precious, because it goes away, people hold on all the harder.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're constantly trying to, because it's so specific to who we are as people, and our experience is so vital to who we believe that we are as individuals. So you take that away, you change that, and all of a sudden you just removed part of my identity. At least it feels that way sometimes.
Noriko, it looked like you were about to jump in.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. a lot because our schools are some of the few spaces, the public schools in Los Angeles, that actually stay somewhat constant. You know, this Emerson was built in, you know, the 1930s, and the campus is a historical building. And so, and there are lots of, you know, Venice High School, you look at schools all across Los Angeles, and there's a lot of really old campuses that have managed to stick around. There's some of the oldest buildings in Los Angeles because LA is so about reinventing itself and tearing down the old and building the new. So I think that, like, you know, knowing that Japanese American kids were walking on the same hardwoods that I still teach on in my classroom is pretty amazing. Yeah, so I was just thinking about how there are just a few, a smattering of places in LA that do sometimes stay some version of the past.
Anybody else?
Just
Got any
like to
questions?
mention, I'd just like to mention that Barry Bergman wrote a story that is set in the 60s. It's called Terminal Flight. And the tone of it, the language that he uses, the slang, it is so spot on. My parents actually grew up here, and I can totally, at the same time, and I can totally get what he's saying based on listening to them talk when I was a little kid. He really nails it, and it's very 1960s. It's a wonderful story in itself, and it's also really well done as far as nailing down a time and place. So that's all. Just a plug for Barry. I really liked his story.
Nice. All right. Cody, you want to wrap us up with some closing arguments?
We will always have nostalgia. We will never let it go. Well, I just saw in the chat, Christopher mentioned the Central Library as another place that, you know, it's like you walk in and you're like, there's so much history here. So I think we could do this again with, like, you know, about libraries or about other things. But I just want to say thank you to everyone for being here and for listening and for all your ideas. It was a blast to the past.
Thank you, everybody who tuned in and who will tune in on YouTube later.
All right, take care, everyone. Have
Thanks,
a great night.
everybody.
Thank you.